today's episode, we're going to be building this dual deck module. Now, the difference between what I build and what you'll typically see on a model railroad is, if you'll notice, this is actually freestanding. So I've got it set up on a couple sawhorses for convenience here. But the idea is you can build not only one level of bench work, but two levels of bench work and only supported by legs. So I can walk all the way around it. I can make this an island. I can bump it up against the wall. But best of all is if I have to move or relocate, I can take this with me. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Getting started here, we're going to go ahead and break down a sheet of plywood. Now I already had a half sheet of plywood laying around, so I'm just going to have to trim that down to 24 inches wide. And then I'm going to rip that into further pieces to break it down into 4 individual chunks. So as you can see, I'm actually using an infeed table as well as an outfeed table. The infeed table is basically just a piece of plywood that I have supported from either end, my table saw on one end and then my Craig machine on the other end actually. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to break the sheet down into half. So for me, I've only got a 36-inch capacity table saw, so breaking sheets in half like this makes it a little safer to use. I'm using some EVA foam underneath to keep from cutting up my outfeed table. And then what I'm going to do here is, because I know I'm already at 24 inches in one direction, I need to be one sheet of plywood narrower in the other, so about 23¼ inches. So I just went ahead and clamped a piece of plywood to my fence. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut those other pieces. And the beauty of doing it this way is there's no measuring involved. And anytime you can not measure something while doing work on the table saw, it's going to save you time. And it's ultimately just going to end up with a better finish, because it's going to be exactly what you need it to be, versus just the fudge factor that you'll get with the measuring tape sometimes. So I'll go ahead and get all 4 of these done. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab, this is basically a little template thing that I've made for doing these dual deck brackets. So it's just 3½ inches on each side of the L. And this isn't meant to be precise. It's just a guide for me, so I know when I'm cutting these things about where I need to stop for the table saw blade so I don't cut too far. And then I'm using my favorite writing implement, which is a mechanical pencil. If you don't use those in your shop or on your model railroad, I highly recommend. They're very cheap, and then you don't have to worry about sharpening pencils all the time or inadvertently grabbing a pen. I also like that they're bright colored. Now, this little block here, this is my version of a 1-2-3 block. So this has the most common sizes of cuts that I make. In this case, it was 3½ inches. So here now I have run my table saw blade all the way up to the top, and I'm actually marking my fence as to the limits of where the blade are. So you'll see I'm rocking the blade back and forth a little bit just to get a good grasp of where it is. And then I go ahead and run that line up vertically, and I'll show you here in a picture in just a second. So that's the back side, and then you can see the front side and basically how I do it there. So now, unfortunately, I didn't get a good shot of me doing this from another angle. I didn't think about it until afterwards, but basically what I do is I start with the piece of plywood flat on the table saw with the blade all the way down. I'll turn it on, and then I'll run it all the way up, and then I stop just about where that line is, but actually back just a little bit. And the purpose of that is so I don't cut too far. So I want these corners to be crisp, and I'm going to go ahead and show you the second and third cut, and you'll see better here on this instance as to where I stop it. So you'll see that it actually lines up with the line on the fence there with the first cut that I made for the backside of these dual deck brackets. And then I always turn the blade off when I'm doing this. I do not pull back while the blade is going. Some people do, but I don't feel comfortable doing it. It's just not a safe practice. So again, I go ahead and start, pull forward until I get to that line. It lines up, and then I turn it off. And you can see I'm just pointing out that it lines up there. And don't worry, my fingers actually are further away from that blade than you would think they are. So no worries there. And then I go ahead and I just finish the cuts with the jigsaw. And what we're going to do here for this is, because I'm doing everything times 4, is I'm basically going to show you the practice on each one, do it once, and then we'll move forward just to save some time. So again, just using a standard jigsaw. You can use an upcut blade, a downcut blade, really doesn't matter. Either way, you're going to end up doing a little bit of cleanup afterwards. I usually just use the jigsaw myself, but sometimes it's actually better to use the a pocket knife or a box knife or something like that to clean it up a little bit, because it doesn't come off too bad. All right, so we've got most of them going, and then that big scrap piece actually gets put down in my pile, and I'll use that for other stuff later on. So if you are creating a true dual deck layout, this next step is something you can skip. But this particular person is actually using this as a way to just get a valance over the top of the layout. So in this case, we're actually cutting it at an angle. And this is actually a really neat trick, and it's something I learned a long time ago, but it's a quick way to go ahead and make yourself an angled cut on a piece of long wood on the table saw safely without having to do a whole heck of a lot of fancy setup. So I just got a piece of scrap plywood off my pile that was wide enough, so when I flip it over, I have a little bit of extra plywood on both sides. And I'm going to take a couple scrap blocks here and screw it in on the bottom side, so I can use this same template over and over on all 4 of these pieces and not have to make any changes. I can just slide it on, put the 2 screws in, and I'm good to go. Now, if you're only making one cut like this, you can skip these blocks. You don't need them. You can go ahead and make your cut. But for time savings, for me, knowing that I've got to make a bunch of these, I'm going to go ahead and set it up so I've got it, and I actually still have it put together, so the next time I make these, I already have it set up. So again, I'm just using that piece of plywood and I'm lining it up to the edge of the blade there, and that's going to make sure that when I cut, it's going to actually follow the edge of the thicker board there that's on top. So I'll be cutting off about an inch on the front down to 0 on the back. And then again, I'm going to do this 4 times, but I'm only showing you once just for the sake of time. But you see, it makes a really clean cut, and it cuts it nice and quickly. Again, I'm waiting for that blade to stop. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull it back and pull those screws out and set up the next one. And then you can see what it looks like after I pulled that guide off. So I've got nice 2 inches on the top, and then it tapers down to 3.5 inches, which is my standard on the bottom. Again, so you can see quickly going ahead and installing it on the next piece. It's just 2 screws, and then it's ready to go. Now, the next step here, I will admit, is actually a bit dangerous to do the way that I do it. It is probably not the most ideal way to do it. However, it is the fastest way I've found to do it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking these 4 dual deck brackets, and we're going to be notching the back side on both the top and the bottom, so we can get a 1x4 cross member in there to help support the back of the benchwork. Now, this is one style of building these dual deck brackets. In an upcoming video, I will be showing you an additional style which actually doesn't require these notches. However, it is a little more material intensive. So have a look out for that, and we'll get started here in just a second. So what I'm doing is I'm just clamping all 4 of these together, and the main purpose of this is not only so I can cut them all at once, but I actually found that cutting multiples at a time versus just one at a time actually did make this marginally safer. So just for the sake of safety and speed, I'm doing both at the same time. Now I'm using an orange block here. All this is a piece of plywood that I cut and spray painted orange. I've got a bunch of these laying all over the shop. Again, it's so I don't have to measure, and then I used my my homemade 1-2-3 block to make sure that the saw blade was at 3.5 inches to the outside edge of the blade versus the inside this time. So I'm going to go ahead and make my first pass all the way at that 3.5 inches all the way through,
and then I'm going to back up and I'm going to start going side to side. And this is why it's dangerous, is because this can technically grab and spin it in my hand. Now what you don't see from this angle is I've actually got my thumb on the back side of my square there, and I'm only going forward about a 1/16 of an inch at a time. So again, it does have the potential to grab it and twist it out of your hand, but the way I'm doing it, I'm really minimizing that risk as much as I can. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip this around and do it another way. And the other way is to go forward and back and just cut the width of the saw blade every single time. Now this is technically the safer way to do it, but it is very, very time consuming. And then you have to do the back and forth thing anyway, just to clean up the cut when you're done. So you have two methods to do it there. And technically you can do this with a couple other different methods as well. But you know, this is the fastest way I found to do it. So now I've gone ahead and switched over, and this is actually the first time I'm showing this on my channel, but this is actually my drill template for making all of my modular bench work. And what I'm doing here is, again, I'm going to grab one of those orange blocks. I'm going to show you how it fits up in that little slot that we just created. So it fits nice and flush, and it's flush to the back as well. I'm going to put that little orange block in my template there, and then I'm going to clamp this in place. Now what this is a combination of a 5/16 inch hole and a 1 inch hole every other 3 inches. So it's 5/16 1 inch, 5/16 1 inch, and so on. And then I'm just using a couple different drills to go ahead and drill all those holes. Now again, I did that 4 times, and then I switch over here to my router with my 3/16 round over bit, and I'm just going to round over those edges. And I do this for 2 reasons. One is when I drill the holes, it leaves a little bit of a rough edge. And then 2, when you're actually passing wires through it, it's both nicer on your fingers to get the wires through there, but it's also nicer on the wires. You're less likely to rub through over time. So it just looks nicer overall. So again, I'm going to do that 4 times. And now I'm going to switch over to my Craig machine and drill all of the Craig holes, which are pocket screw holes. And this is how I assemble all of my bench work. Now I'm using 2 different methods here. I use the machine for the back holes, and then these holes here, I'm actually using the hand template because I can't actually use the machine. I can't get into that notched area. So I'm just using the standard Craig products. Links below, by the way, if you're curious about any of these machines or tools, I do have links in my Amazon store down below. So now I've gone ahead and cut all of my my long cross members. In this case, the module is going to be 7 feet long total. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark these on 16 3/4 inch centers. And you can see I'm actually using a little calculator app on my phone to multiply the 16 3/4 over and over again to actually give me fractional numbers. Very cool app. I'll link it down below. If you don't have it on your phone, I believe it's actually available on Android as well as Apple, but it's a very useful app. And then here I'm just making some cross members, and these are basically the same process as building the dual decks, just less work. So I'm going to go ahead and skip the how-to on that, and then we're going to start assembling the module here. So I've got 4 dual deck cross members and then 2 regular ones. We're going to go ahead and get those screwed to the cross members. So the concept here is that the bottom is going to be my standard 16 inch on center bench work, and then the upper one doesn't have the middle cross members because it's not supporting any trains. However, it is plenty strong to do that. So if you are building a true dual deck layout, this is a great way to go about it. It does take some time, and there's a little bit of a learning curve to building these dual deck brackets, but if you don't want to go through all of that effort, I do actually have these available on my website. So they're not cheap because, as you can tell, they take a little bit of effort to build, but overall, you know, they create a very, very strong layout that you can move if you need to, and it's, you know, strong enough to be self-supporting. So, you know, French cleat or freestanding with legs, it's a great way to build a dual deck layout. Thanks for watching.